that's what stories often do, right? You're unlocking what's already in there.
Yeah.
You're helping to bring it to life, to massage it and shape it in a way that you know is going to be compelling
Yeah.
to other people. Something I talk to companies about is that you always need to be looking at your story to see if it's matching, right? Because number one, your story is always changing. Number two, the needs of your customers is always changing. And three, your competitors are always changing. So you have to be able to sort of look and say, does my story really represent where I am today? Does it represent where my customers are today and my potential customers? And does it differentiate me from others in my space? Your story's never done.
Welcome back to another episode of Video Storytelling for Community Engagement by The Art of Storytelling. I'm Miranda O'Connor, and today I spoke with Dan Seeger from Stories for Good. Dan is really passionate about helping companies own their story, and we found so much in common through our similar lines of work. If you've been enjoying these podcasts, please connect with me on LinkedIn or through our website, theartofstorytelling.com. We would love to hear your feedback, or if you'd like to be a guest, please let us know. If you want to support the show, the number one thing you can do is share it on your social media and tag me and the guest. That helps us get the word out, and we really appreciate it. Dan Seeger is in the US, and we connected recently through a mutual contact who heard me speaking at a webinar and thought that we should connect because we're both into storytelling. So I wanted to thank Lou Klein for making that connection. And Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, Stories for Good?
Absolutely. Thanks, Miranda. It's great to be here. I'm excited. So I have a company called Stories for Good, and I began about a year ago. And I've been in the storytelling side for about 32 years, working for companies before that. We didn't call it storytelling, back then. It's sort of somewhat a newer term in the business world. But I started my career in PR, and then got involved in more speech writing, and then ultimately working for companies, creating brand level narratives, and made the decision about a year ago to go out and do this for solopreneurs, small companies, large companies. Basically, it's content marketing through storytelling.
Excellent. Yeah. And that is very similar to what we do. We are just using the visuals for storytelling. And Dan, so in your experience, why do stories work so well? Why do people like to listen to stories, and why do they really resonate with the people who listen or read them or watch them?
I mean, stories, as you know, were handed down from the beginning of time, right? Before we had the written word, we had stories, and that's how information was passed from generation to generation. And it still remains that way. People remember stories.
Absolutely.
People remember the emotion they feel when they hear a story. They know what it sort of does inside them. And I think that's why it's such an effective tool for businesses to bring out a little more of the emotion of what's going on in the business.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's exactly why it works so well. Because it is something that you remember a lot easier when, if you think of a company or you think of someone that you've heard their story or read their story, it's the story that you remember when you're remembering the person.
Right. People buy into people. People buy from people, they don't buy from companies. So ultimately, it helps put a face on, what could be a faceless company. Because, some companies get stuck in the feature and function side of things, what they do. And again, what both of us do is figuring out the why, getting to that core level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I like to say that that's humanizing the brand and helping your company to really connect with the audience or the stakeholders or even if it's the employees, it's humanizing your brand. And I mean, that's actually going to be the topic of our next webinar in September, is going to be humanizing your brand through storytelling. Dan, what do you think are elements of a good story? So if you're doing a written piece, what would make the elements what are the elements that are going to make the story really compelling?
The three pillars that I work towards are being memorable, ownable, and honest. right? So, taking them one at a time, memorable. Well, you've gotta bring in the emotion, as we talked about a minute ago. You have to allow a little bit of vulnerability, right? When stories are real and they bring in things that are not 100% perfect, right? They connect with people. They strike something, a chord inside people. Say, "Oh yeah, I've often felt the same way too." Right? Ownable. It's got to be your story. I like to say the only thing you own in the world, the only thing you truly own is your story.
Yeah.
And so finding the right words to tell your story. So when I work with companies, we look at the competitors and we see, oh, what words are they using to tell their story? And then we find our own words that are going to the third pillar, honest, right? They have to be true to you because as people can sniff out a manufactured story a mile away.
Mhm.
And it really is, it's a difficult process at times. It's very, even for a big company. I work with solopreneurs as well, and it's emotional sometimes, like coming out and like being willing to share your story.
Yeah.
But when you've done that work, when you've really um, dug deep to find what your story is, then all of a sudden it feels really honest. So that's
Yeah.
those are memorable, ownable, honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know how you do your work. I guess you go through a series of interviews and talking to the client. And what we do is we do the same thing. But we do the interviews on camera. And that is when people do feel very nervous when they have to sit and talk about their story. And really, this is like they are the subject matter expert in their life, in their business, in their brand, and they should be confident in what they have to say. And they usually are. Like they know their stuff, but they feel there is a little bit of discomfort sitting in front of a camera telling their story. But what I find, and you probably find this too, because you're doing more written pieces, but I find, you can go through the process, talking to someone on camera, doing the interview, and at the end of it, they feel okay that they've told their story. But what they really like is when we come back to them and we've edited their story and we've moved around the thoughts and the feelings and the content, and we've put some kind of emotional hook at the beginning. By the time they watch that video, that's now maybe like 3 or 5 minutes, they feel
Right.
really proud of what they said because we have massaged that story into something that makes them proud. How do your clients feel when you come back to them with their story? It's still their story in their words, but you have
Yeah.
massaged it into this nicer piece.
Maria, I think that's a great point. So actually, at one point, I considered naming my company "Your Story Better," right? And then,
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
couple of people talked me out of it, but it is really like we're not creating anything,
No.
right? We're packaging it from out there and helping put it in a form that's really, we know as storytellers, is going to resonate with people.
Yeah.
So I've certainly experienced a lot of what you just mentioned there. The other thing which I find fascinating about the process is, part of what I do is I interview a lot of customers and clients, right? So when I'm figuring out, let's say Miranda's story, right? It's not that I don't just want to talk to you. I don't trust you, but it's like people are going to add color to that story. Because sometimes our customers, our clients, our friends, that's something else that I do is I often talk to a longtime friend, because it helps me get to the core of what makes them tick. So very often these customers, clients, friends see things that the person themselves don't see,
Correct.
and it opens their eyes up, and it's really very enlightening because when people see the difference they've made in other people's lives, how they've improved something for someone, it's incredible. And storytelling can help really show the power of the impact of what a company can do.
Mhm.
So it's the whole thing is very revelatory.
Yes. Yeah, and definitely when you talk to those like clients or employees or friends, or when you talk to someone else and you ask them their perspective, they will say it in words that the person you're telling the story for would not think to put those words together because they don't feel like that about themselves. So it does help with
Yeah.
like that imposter syndrome, or just, you don't want to be too proud and too bold to say how amazing you are. But when someone else says it and they actually say the why and the what you do that makes it so special, that is the amazing part. And that's what really brings the emotion into the story and helps people to say, oh, this is a really true, believable story, and I like it.
One of the first clients I worked with, and sometimes they don't remember. They don't remember some of the things they've said over the years. So
Yeah.
this woman was a career coach, and I was talking to one of her clients, and she said, one time Crystal said to me, "Everything in life is a trade-off except your soul." I was like, "Wow, that's a great line." I went back to my client and told her about it. She goes, "Oh, why? That's right. I did used to say that. I haven't said," and it became a really important part of her positioning and her story, right? Because again, the story is the jumping off point, right?
Yeah.
We create the story, and then we create all that content around it. In your case, you're starting with the video. In my case, I'm starting with the written piece. But then we say, okay, how do we bring this to life? And
Mhm.
that's when it gets especially fun. And sometimes people don't always get like, okay, we're going to create this story document, but we're not going to use it verbatim anywhere. I'm like, well, why? It's like, no, because we're going to use it as the Rosetta Stone, as the Magna Carta to figure out how else we're going to bring it to life. But it's
Right.
sort of there. It's something we keep going back to and looking at and
Mhm.
say, okay, is this speech that I've written, is it true to my story? Right? Those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Dan, will tell me, how or where can stories be used, or where are you using your written words in stories?
So let's start with, the most obvious is the website, right? Is your website telling your story properly? You think about your homepage, your about us page, but also in your testimonials, right? In your customer case studies, in your PR and blog, all those areas. Videos, obviously, videos are, as you know, very important and powerful visual ways to tell your story. I love doing it. I love working on video scripts and seeing it come to life, whether it's through a live action, animation, so and speeches, as I mentioned. So all these different areas are great ways to social media to tell your story.
You were telling me when we spoke last week about the bios, and I thought that was really interesting how, you talked to me about the initial bio story,
Right.
this employee. And employee stories are great. I mean, we've done lots of employee stories, and they're always like so enlightening about the company. And also, it makes the employees feel really good about working at this company. But
Yes.
tell me a little more about the bios with the initial bio and then the bio of an employee who's been with a company for a few years down the
Yeah,
line.
it's a great point, and it's a lost opportunity for a lot of companies. So, it plays into the set it and forget it mentality,
Yes.
which can never happen with storytelling, right? You can never set it and forget it. So bios are a great example. So, when a new person joins the company, executive level, or wherever you're going to have, their bio on your website, um, naturally, 95% of it, 99% of it's going to be about their former company, right? Because they just started at the new company. So their accomplishments at the former company or former companies. But 6 months later, a year later, you need to be going back on a regular basis and looking at those bios and refreshing them to talk about the story they're doing at the new company, what they've accomplished, what they've brought to the new company, things they're proud of, things how they've helped others, right? Because then, so bios are just in the, let's always look at them and make sure that they're telling the company story properly. One of my pet peeves is when companies just put a link to someone's LinkedIn bio on their website. And sure, it's easy, but their LinkedIn profile is not doing storytelling. It is just doing fact giving.
Yes.
And your people are your company ultimately. So
Mhm.
making sure their bios reflect your company uh,
Mhm.
are great. And actually, you right before you raised Well, those employee profiles are amazing. And, another audience you always have to think about are potential employees. It's very much a two-way street with employees. You
Yes.
want to hire someone, but they're checking you out too. They want to see if you're a right fit for what they want to do next in their career.
Using the stories for recruitment is a very powerful tool that, only the really big companies are thinking of doing that, but it's something that any size company can do because, if you're talking about your mission and your vision and your purpose and what you do and why you do it, and you bring in some employee stories to that so that the employees can say what it's really like working here. I think that is really key to recruiting and also retaining those employees because employees, it's a competitive world out there and employees have options of where do they want to work. In my opinion, using stories, it's not just for the selling and the marketing, it's also for selling yourself and selling your company to the recruitment options that are out there and the employees that are looking to join a good company.
Couldn't agree more, right? You want to retain and attract the
Yeah.
best talent and the right talent for you, right? Because when you find people who are attracted to your story, they're more likely going to be a good culture fit. Your story is a key part of your culture.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think last time we spoke, you told me that you think every company is mission driven, which obviously they are. I agree with that. And so, what do you think of that statement that every company is mission driven?
Yeah, I mean, when I started Stories for Good, my initial thought was I'm going to only work for nonprofits. That was my goal because I am really passionate about what nonprofits can do to help change the world. And as I started diving in, I realized, that, and this was sort of an eye opener to me, that every company has a mission to help people, or they wouldn't be in business, right? Whether it's installing HVAC systems or selling shoes, right? Everything has a mission to make someone's life a little bit better.
Hmm. Absolutely.
If you're not bringing that mission to the forefront, then you're not doing your company justice.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper to find out what that mission is because you might not always, like, you might have an assumption, especially if it's a company you haven't worked with before. I mean, like, I have a client right now that we're working with for the second or I guess third time. And it's an amazing little hairdressing salon in the town of Orangeville on Broadway. And so initially you think, okay, how can I help this salon? Like I don't know how to sell to consumers and help them, come and get your haircut. And that's when you're just looking at it on a superficial level. But when you actually start to talk to the owner and she tells you about, her mission is to support women with curly hair that, they don't always have hairdressers that they can go to who can actually deal with their hair. And so her mission is to be able to help all of these people who cannot be helped anywhere else and to do it with using like the cleanest, most environmentally friendly products. And
Sure.
she also buys products from only Canadian companies, women-owned companies, and as close and as local to home as she can. Then you start to see, okay, this company has a purpose and they have a mission and they've put a lot of thought into how do they want to do their business and make themselves different and special and unique to other hairdressing salons. I mean, there's millions of these things, but
Right.
you know,
I love that. I love
yeah,
that. And because ultimately what they're not doing, they're not giving a good haircut. They're building confidence.
yes, yes.
They're making that person feel better about themselves. There was someone I was working with once on, their personal branding, and she was involved in professional development for K-12 teachers, elementary school teachers. When we began working together, I said, "Okay, tell me what you do." And she said, "Well, I create these worksheets, and I work with teachers to help them do this, and then we do this, and that." And I'm like, "Okay, good." And then we worked together for a while, and then when we were done, I said, "Tell me what you do." And she said, "I build better teachers. Your hairdresser builds confident women."
Yes.
Right? That's ultimately what they do. And so, yes, everyone's got a mission.
Yeah, and it's great when you actually get to, the juice of the story and they actually tell you what it is. And then you think, oh yes, now I have something that I can work with that's going to make this a powerful piece, going to make it interesting and memorable and
Yeah.
believable. So yeah, that's actually like where the magic lies is when you hear that actual special sentence come out of their mouth.
everything comes easier after that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Right? Once you get that core nugget of what you're all about,
Yeah.
the rest of the storytelling start to flow naturally out of
Yeah.
that.
And it usually works really well when they talk about how they are helping other people rather than trying to talk about themselves and what makes them so good. Like it's easier for them to talk about how their work helps. Same hairdresser we were talking to, she called me and she said she won an award or she's nominated for an award. She's now a change maker. And I didn't know that, what is this hairdressing? Like, how are you a change maker? What is this association of hairdressers and change makers? But there is an award ceremony, and she was nominated as a change maker because of the work that she's doing. And this comes down to what she's trying to do, making sure her employees are really happy, making sure her customers feel safe and cared for when they come into her salon, and then all the other things about the environmental stuff and the women-owned businesses. She had to make this video and answer these 5 questions, and they were simple questions about, why do you think you're deserving to win this award? And that was the first question, how it was listed. That was the first question. And it was the most difficult question for her because she doesn't feel like she's the only one doing this and that she doesn't feel like she's more deserving than anyone else.
Right.
But the last question was something like, how do you help or how have you made changes and, helped your customers and employees make these changes? And I said, you know what, let's just flip the questions and let's talk about the helping work that you do first. And she was so cool with it. Like she was able to talk about how, it's great for her employees to get this recognition. She was able to talk about it when you flip the story around. And the last thing you asked is, well, why are you so proud of winning this award? Because you've turned it upside down and you've made it not about me, but about what I've done to help other people.
You freed her to be able
Yes,
to.
I totally freed her. And it was literally just turning the questions around.
That's what stories often do, right? You're unlocking what's already in there.
Yeah.
You're helping to bring it to life, to massage it and shape it in a way that is going to be compelling to other people. Something I talk to companies about is that you always need to be looking at your story to see if it's matching, right? Because number one, your story is always changing. Number two, the needs of your customers is always changing. And 3, your competitors are always changing. So you have to be able to sort of look and say, does my story really represent where I am today? Does it represent where my customers are today and my potential customers? And does it differentiate me from others in my space? Your story's never done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like life. Your story is never done.
Yeah. It's constantly changing. And I tell that to clients too, like, don't think you can do this video now and use this video for 3 or 4 years because it's going to be outdated. Things are going to change. Things are going to improve. You're going to want to tell your story again.
Yeah. You add more color to it all the time, right? Even if the bones of the story are the same, right? Even if your hairdresser is still serving the same group of customers in 5 years, she's got more stories.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You can add more color and more proof points to her foundation.
I want to give a little shout out to Dana Copeland from Flaunt Salon in Orangeville, town of Orangeville on Broadway. She is an amazing change maker, an amazing businesswoman.
Awesome. If I had curly hair and lived in Canada, I would come visit her and I was a woman. So, but beyond that, it would be a great match.
Yeah. So Dan, what about organizations that are not telling their story? So, in my opinion, if it doesn't mean that there is no story around your brand, like it doesn't mean that there's no narrative being formed around your brand and your story. It just means that you are not really participating in it and you're not helping it along. Because if you're not telling your story, someone else is telling your story.
Right.
That could be, what your clients are saying to other people, what your employees say about their job, what they say to their friends, what the media has to say about you or not, and what the community says and feels about you. So, your story is always being developed, but you need to be a participant in that story so that the narrative goes a little more along your way than along the way that the other people are taking it, if they are not properly, directed or
Right.
educated about your brand. So, what is your opinion on how the whole narrative and your whole brand forms with your story?
Yeah, it's like that saying, you can't stop the waves. You might as well learn how to surf,
Hmm.
right? So employees are going to be talking to people about your company, um, and you want to arm them and they want to be armed. They want to know their mission. They want to be able to have the right words. Someone told me a story once where she had just started at Google. And first day on the job, and they had like one of those shuttle buses that takes you from the parking lot to the main campus. And she's in the shuttle bus, and she sits next to someone else and says, "Oh, are you new here?" "Yeah, I'm new." What are you going to be working on?" She tells him what they're going to be working on. He goes, "Oh, that's going to be really impactful." And then later, as she got into the company, realized that like impactful was one of their core tenets,
Yes.
right? And because the veteran employee kind of was talking, in the way of Google, they were able to impart that down to the new employee,
Yeah.
right? So there's like we've kind of come full circle in our conversation. Like stories are the way things are passed down from generation to generation. Stories are passed through, employee to employee as well, and through customers and through members of the media, like you said. All these different channels are passing around stories. So arming them with what you want to be their story
Hmm.
is exactly what you want to do. So it's a great opportunity, and it doesn't have to be huge. That's the thing. Like this is not a rebranding,
No.
right? It's not taking HBO Max and changing it to Max, or Twitter and changing it to X. At some point we'll see if this podcast down the road, like 2 years from now, will Twitter still be X? Well,
Yes.
it is about taking what's true and honest to you and spreading it through the company, right? It's not reinventing, rebranding. It's just taking what makes you special and being willing to talk about it. And like we said earlier, that requires a little bit of vulnerability.
Hmm. Yeah, and also being able to talk about it in a consistent way so that everyone in the company is aware of the story of the company and how to discuss the company and what the company is like, what it's working towards. And I've seen that many times. Usually, the bigger organizations like banks, oil companies, we've done lots of interviews with them, and no matter who you talk to, they all can talk along the same line. And it is what the story is with the company. It is, where's the company going in a few years? Why are we doing this project now? How is this going to help, the economy or whatever? And they all have the right words. They have the
Yeah.
right words because they've all heard it so many times, and the story is being rolled out to them in everything, in their blogs, in their internal communications mostly. So they know how to talk about the company story. And then when you get another company and you talk to 3 or 4 employees and they're not really sure what the mission is, or they start to say it in different ways, and you think, okay, so this company hasn't really gone through the process of understanding what their story is, talking about it. I guess it has to do with just awareness, and it's something that HR probably has to put some effort into, HR and communications. Yeah. Those companies, their story does not come across as connected as it could be.
So you raised a really good point, because, let's go back to your example of the large company where everybody was saying that doesn't mean they're robots,
No.
right? I had someone that I worked with who said every department should have their own special brand of weird. And that always stuck with me, because a division, a department, a function, they're all going to bring the story to life in a way that's right for them.
Yeah.
Maybe using similar words, but then there is something special about your smaller group, and that's important for company culture and coherence.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's sometimes it's just that they understand the goals that they're working towards, so that they can they can talk about that, so like, why do you like working here? Because I like, working towards these
Right.
goals. What is this
Right.
project
Here's
about?
the main goal.
Yeah.
Here's the main story. And here's how I
Yeah.
and my team help bring it to life.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You feel like you're part of something, one big mission, rowing in the same direction when
Yeah.
you have the story and the mission to guide you.
Yeah.
100%. And yeah, here's the company story, and here's how I help make
Hmm.
it feel.
Hmm.
That's an immense point of pride for people.
Yeah. So, last question.
Yes.
When you're working with an organization, do you work more with the HR people or the leaders or the communications, or like, where do you go to find these elements of the story?
Generally, I start with the marketing team. That's generally who brings me in. But I go right to the CEO. If I'm not talking to the CEO, then I'm not doing the company justice, right? So I speak with the CEO and their team, their top leaders, as well as we talked about earlier, customers and whatnot. And the CEO ultimately is the person who has to buy into this, right? The buck stops with that person, and making sure that and as you said earlier, it's wonderful to see their excitement when it comes to life, right? Because then the wheels start turning in their head about, okay, this is great. So here's how we're going to do this with this, with this, with this. And they start thinking of all these different ways in which they're going to get the story out there. So
Yeah.
once they see what's going on, they really become excited partners in helping to bring it to life.
Yeah. And then what kind of feedback do you get when you start to give them, the written pieces? Because sometimes people get very emotional when they
Yeah.
see and hear themselves with their story, and they feel so amazing and proud of what they said and how they sound and how they look. We often get, you guys worked magic, or I got goosebumps, so it brought tears to my eyes when I saw it. What kind of feedback do you get from your stories?
All of those,
Really?
yeah. I mean, again, it's a very personal thing. It's
Yeah.
a very emotional thing. And when I work with people, you have to really give them space. You have to let them sit with it. You have to let them marinate with your drafts, because it's very personal to them.
Yes.
You have to give them the time. So it's an iterative process. And again, you do your best to come up with every word that you think is perfect. And there's any words that this doesn't feel honest to me. And then when I come out of the process as well, we develop a list of words that you want to use again and again in all of
Right.
your. These are
Yeah.
your own words that you want to do. And as I mentioned earlier, we look at the competitors very closely, and we make sure that the competitors aren't trying to own those words. We come up with words
Yes.
that really can be the ones we stand for.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, Dan, I think this has been an amazing podcast, and I'm sure we can talk about stories in all different kind of forms
yeah,
at another time. So maybe we'll have to do another one
I
because I
love
feel
it.
like we have a lot more still to discuss. But I'm going to leave it here today. And thank you so much for participating. This was super fun and very informative. And I hope all of our listeners and watchers have enjoyed this and got something out of it.
I hope so too, Miranda. It was an honor. It was a lot of fun, and it's been great getting to know you and your company. I'd love to do it again sometime. This was great.